While I was watching the television, I accidentally dropped the remote down a crease in the sofa. Reaching between the cushions, I blindly allowed my hand to crawl around and feel for it. My arm moved around down there, acquiring dust and cobweb retrieved from the uncleaned floor. It wasn't the dust brushing against my hand that caught me off guard, nor was it the strange chills that caused the hairs on my arm to stand. It was the moist, mushy fingers wrapping themselves around my wrist from below the couch and pulling me downward. If it had happened today, the story would have circulated on social media and maybe even gone viral. But before the World Wide Web, bizarre stories were free to happen now and then without necessarily catching the attention of the country. If you get a chance, take some time to browse through a microfiche news archive. You might be surprised at the stories you can find. There was a story at my elementary school that got talked about when I was a kid. I'd call it an urban legend, but the adults in our town were willing to confirm its truth once we were old enough for them not to worry about the details traumatizing us. I went to that elementary school in the 1990s. The story was from the 1980s, but that was recent enough for some of my classmates to have older siblings who were there. The story was this. A pupil was playing out in the field behind the playground, which was against the rules, but we all did it sometimes, and found a human vertebrae. The vertebrae was still bloody, and the student proudly showed his find to the other students on the playground, thinking he had found part of an animal that had been eaten by a predator. The school nurse happened to be at the playground at the time and looked to see what was going on. Recognizing the vertebrae, she confiscated it before one of the smart kids realized what they were actually looking at and told everyone, telling them it was an interesting find and that the science teacher might want to study it and put it on display. The police were called, and they did a line search of the field. They found a few more vertebrae and other bone fragments and a lot of blood. Some entrails, too. All they knew about the deceased was that he was an adult male. There was no identification to be found in what was left of his clothing or anywhere else. This would be disturbing enough, but the real source of mystery and intrigue was the coroner's report on the cause of death. Falling from at least 1,000 or 2,000 feet, this man, with no identification and no parachutist gear to be found, had either jumped, fallen, or been pushed, or dropped, out of an aircraft, probably during the night before school. A tree overhanging the area where the most carnage was found had a couple sharply broken branches in the speculated fall trajectory, confirming the theory. The man was never identified, and as far as I know, the case is still cold. I'd heard stories about what confinement in the cramped quarters of a submarine can do to a man. Sure, those in charge of training screen for that type of instability, but the occasional nutter does make it on to the crew sometimes. That was never me though. I spent a year and a half preparing myself for life on a submarine, and I had no fears about what was in store for me. The common conditions that caused fear in lesser men, I had expected. However, it's the unexpected where true fear lies. I hadn't expected the primary power to go out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and that had me tense. I was even less prepared for when the engines stopped working, and that pushed me to being scared. As madness set in for the crew around me, I tried to stay brave and get things civil again, but every man has his breaking point. The sound of steel groaning under the building pressure of the ocean water was mine. Cracks and pops joined the groans as the vessel sank deeper into the abyss. The already tight corridors warped and became tighter as every surface around me began to slowly compress. Knowing my fate, I looked for something to end it quickly, but unfortunately I was still struggling for shallow breaths when the walls pinned me in place. And then the sub stopped sinking, stopped shrinking. Ocean floor. Now, unable to move a single muscle in my body, I pray for something unexpected to happen. Because I know my fate, and in this pitch-black vice, I've never been so terrified. That's all my story today for the Red series. I'll meet you in the next video.